Patrick Mork, the brand father. Thanks for joining me here today. Where are you joining us from today?
I am live from Miami.
Man, where do we start? Like, I got a head full of questions I want to nerd out. You're a Silicon Valley guy. There's been upheaval in Silicon Valley for the last week. Do I start with the OpenAI stuff with Patrick? Do I start with his journey and some of the personal decisions that he made? Do I start with, because I'm a nerd, with my phone? Do I start with him being the brand father for Google Play? What the hell? Like, where do I start, Patrick? You start. Where are we starting today?
We can start in so many different places. I think there's a lot of people geeking out about the OpenAI stuff this week. So we can talk a little bit about that.
Let's start there. So for those that are tuning in, what's happening in Silicon Valley?
Well, a lot of the news this week was around Sam Altman, who's obviously the CEO and the founder of OpenAI, being pushed out of his own company, right? Partially by his co-founders, and there was a mutiny on the board. And then all of a sudden, 24, 48 hours later, being reinstated as CEO, which is that is not something that we see every day. And that's kind of stuff is fresh in my mind not because of the brouhaha of the Netflix kind of fiasco of the guy being pushed out of his own company and reinstated. I looked at it more from, what does it tell us a little bit about OpenAI as a company from the perspective of how that company is led and what kind of culture that company has, right? So for folks who are not maybe into tech as much, or maybe have been busy this week, OpenAI obviously has created ChatGPT, which now has 100 million users. Sam is one of the founders of the company. I think it's the fastest growing company in the history of that kind of consumer-facing technology in terms of adoption rates, right? They've been remarkable. And obviously, ChatGPT is a large language model tool that allows anybody to ask any question and get answers. Now, whether the validity of the answers is always correct is a different question. But anyway, massively successful company, very high profile founder, very high profile product. And the guy was pushed out of his company ostensibly, based on what we know, because he was not being candid with the board, and the board felt that he wasn't telling them all the things that he was doing, and that he was making decisions that were maybe not aligned with where they wanted to take the board and where they wanted to take the company, right? That was the reason that we got, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when you push out a founder like that, my time in Silicon Valley, pushing out founders for venture capitalists, for investors, or boards is always difficult. It's always very hard, because those people are the people who started the company. They are the heart and soul of the company. They are part of the reason why people are inspired to go work for a company like that, often making a small salary or much less money than they would make. So it's always a very difficult decision, and one which I'm sure the board didn't take lightly. But in this case, I think the way it was handled was frankly atrocious, right? The guy barely had any heads up. It wasn't communicated to Satya Nadella, who is obviously the Microsoft CEO and a big partner of OpenAI. And a lot of people were taken really by surprise by this. And the short version of the story, of course, is that there was a revolt in the company itself. Employees demanded that he be reinstated. A lot of them threatened to quit. The COO actually quit as a note of protest. And eventually, I think the board had to capitulate and bring him back, which is, you don't see this stuff happen. Generally, when somebody gets pushed out, they're done, they're gone, and there's a replacement and everything else. And I think what made it so unusual, on the one hand, was the speed and the abruptness at which it was done. The way it was handled was really poorly handled. And then I think one of the interesting things was that all of a sudden you saw something you've never really seen before, at least I haven't seen before in Silicon Valley, which is you saw a near mutiny by the employees saying, guys, this is our founder, this is our leader. A bunch of us are going to actually leave. Most of us have signed a letter demanding that you guys bring him back. And now, of course, there's an added demand by the employees saying, we also demand that the board resign. Not a big surprise, right? If you try and kill the king and you fail, generally it's off with your heads. So I'm not very surprised by that. But I was just like really shocked, I think, the way most people were at how bad the leadership was. I was like, how can you make a decision like that? How can you fail to communicate it properly to employees? How can you fail to get buy-in from all the right people? How can you fail to communicate it to partners? And then, of course, I think there's another angle to look at, which is the failure of leadership on behalf of those who were involved, right? Clearly, if your co-founder, which in this case is Ilya, who's one of the co-founders, the technical head of OpenAI, goes to the board and says you need to be removed, something obviously led up to that. So that just doesn't happen from one day to the next. Obviously, there's probably been a deep series of schisms between him and Sam that has led up to this. Maybe a lot of things have been tried, but still, it takes pretty bad leadership to do something like this. From the point of view, when I think about leadership, I think about things like empathy, I think about humility, I think about communication, active listening, all things which good leaders have. And so for me, as a coach, as somebody who works with startup CEOs, who works with CEOs in general, who tries to improve people's leadership ability, I look at this and I'm like, wow, what are we actually learning about this fiasco, about where leadership went wrong?
Yeah.
Why weren't these guys communicating more? Were they really listening to each other? Were they really empathizing with how deeply divided each was on these issues? Because I'm sure that the reasons the board had around AI safety, not wanting to commercialize the product too quickly, not wanting to put a tool which most of us still don't understand, which is incredibly powerful, into the hands of the masses. These are life-changing decisions. This technology is like anything we've seen arguably since electricity. Like, that's how big the magnitude of this is.
I think what was as fascinating to me, Patrick, from a business perspective, it really shined the light on the governance model of that company. It's a company that has massive influence over the world, and it's continuing to have massive influence in the world. And us as human beings, we step back and say, that was your governance? Those people were actually running the company? Like, that to me is even the bigger question that has to be asked. For companies that are going to have such influence on us as human beings, like, who are these people behind OpenAI? That's the bigger question to me.
Good question. It's a good question. There was, I think the governance issue is the right question to ask, right? It's like when you have a company like Microsoft that's invested $10 billion into the company and they don't have a seat on the board. What's all that about? And they are the ones that are breathing life into OpenAI from a financial perspective. And Satya Nadella heard about it like minutes before the press release went out. So you can't make mistakes like that in any company, much less a company that is having such a transformative effect on the world as OpenAI is.
If maybe we weave some vitamin G into this, maybe we as humans have some gratitude that it happened. Are we not, what happened if we didn't know about this governance situation and something unfolds in 24 or 36 months at the pace that it's moving? You know what I'm getting at, right? So maybe it's good that it did happen now.
It is. I'd like to think that. I think that's a very positive and optimistic message to send out, Keith. And I think the world definitely needs more positivity. If you look at your X feed or you look at the news, there's a lot of bad news out there. So you're right. That is the way to look at it, because now you're going to have people, you're going to have somebody senior from Microsoft for sure on the board. You're going to have, I think I'm not sure if it's confirmed, but there was talk of Larry Summers, who's obviously a big name from government, now being on the board as well. I think when you bring in that level of professionalism, that level of oversight, I think things are going to be done better. And I think people realize that this is a unique company. To me, it's like Google in 2002, right? It's that level of impact.
Yeah, right, it's a really good analogy. Let's weave Patrick into Silicon Valley now. Let's keep it kind of light and fun. So, what are some behind the scenes stories about the challenges and triumphs that you encountered while becoming the brand father of the Google Play Store at Google?
I mean, it was an amazing time. And that's why when I look at what's happening with artificial intelligence, it brings back so many similarities. Because when I was at Google and I landed there in 2011, I originally landed there to be global marketing director for search on mobile phones, right? Mobile was starting to really take off. I had a lot of experience already in mobile. I'd been working in mobile already for 5 or 6 years by then, which was a long time by anybody's standards. And so they hired me to drive search and to launch search on iPhone, on iTab, on the iPad, et cetera. And then one day, my boss, who was the chief marketing officer for Android, who reported into Lorraine Tuhill, who's Google CMO, who still is Google CMO. He came to me and said, "Hey, man, look, we have this major problem. We're getting our asses kicked all over the place by Apple. And Apple's App Store is so much better than ours that it literally threatens the Android ecosystem." Right?
Really?
So Android was still pretty new back then. And the software was not as good as it is today. Obviously, the software's made leaps and bounds advancements. The phones were not as good. And so iPhone was really the thing to own. And the integration of the phone and the hardware in the App Store was really one of the things that was making Apple so successful back then and take market share so quickly, was that they were really the only player who were very good at integrating hardware with software with this new thing called an App Store, right? Which was launched in 2009. And Google is very much behind the times. I've been competing with them in a small startup for years called GetJar. It's a startup that in the meantime has been sold and is no longer in the public eye. And that was a small app store. And we had observed what Google was doing with their app store. And we kept scratching our heads and looking and be like, how is Google getting this so wrong? Right? Like their branding is off. The store kind of, the merchandising sucks. And the quality of the app's bad. And they don't have movies. And they don't have music. And every time you want to get a game, all the latest games are on iPhone. They're not on Android. And so I've been observing this for some time. And Google hired me, and it was actually, there's a whole story behind that as well, which if you want we can share with the listeners, because I didn't originally want to go work at Google, which is a whole different story.
Yeah.
So they called me and they're like we need some help with the app store because it's all fucked up. And I was like, yeah, I've been saying this in public at conferences now for several years that you guys need to change the way that you treat developers, and you really need to work on developing this ecosystem, because people were buying phones based on the ecosystem. If you would talk to consumers, you'd say, why are you buying an iPhone instead of an Android? Some of them would say, I'd like the phone better. It's just easier to use. But other people were saying, I'm buying the iPhone because the games and the apps are so much better. And they have iTunes and they have books. And Google had nothing, right? It's like the poor man's app store. So Google, of course, being Google, they were smart enough to realize, and they're like, we really got to do something about this. And Andy Rubin, who was the founder of Android, which had been acquired by Google,
yes,
and was my boss's boss, was like, he just laid down the law on these guys. We got to completely overhaul this store. We got to rebrand it. We got to relaunch it. We got to build something competitive. And I need this done in 9 months. And when Andy Rubin said something, man, it was like God speaking, right? It was like,
yes,
all hands on deck, whatever we need to do 24/7, 7 days a week working. And the engineering teams did an amazing job of rolling this thing out as fast as they did. So my task was, okay, you need to handle the marketing part of this. You need to build a team, because I got there was no team. I'm like, how many people do I have? Global launch of this new thing. You have 3 people. I was like, wait, what? So you have to build a team. You have to create a brand, and you have to launch all the verticals, right? So you have to launch books, movies, games, TV shows, everything from a marketing perspective, creating all the videos, all the assets, all the pages, all the graphics. So it was a daunting challenge. It was very cool. And it was funny because when I left GetJar, this startup, and I went to search, I was like, oh, thank God, I'm done with apps and games for a while. And that lasted like 4 months. And then they're like, no, we need to pull you back into apps and games because we have a shit show going on with Android market. We need to relaunch it. We need you to do it. So I was like, okay. So that's how I got pulled into it.
How did you arrive at the name Google Play?
Yeah, that's a fun story in and of itself. Before I arrived, my boss, who'd been wearing like 4 different hats because he didn't have somebody running that team, they'd done a lot of experimentation and analysis, and they had come up with a completely different brand. And they took it to the senior management at Google and Larry Page and all these guys, and everybody was like, no, we don't want a completely new brand because we believe that it needs to tie back to Google somehow. And we believe that it needs to be some sort of a Google derivative, and it needs to connote what the store is all about. And so when I got there and I started working with the team on this, we were like, okay, one limitation is pretty easy. It's got to be called Google something, right? Because we all believe that we have this massive super brand, which when you work at Google is so powerful because everybody knows Google. So we have this massive super brand, but we got to call it Google something, right? But we don't have a mandate to create something from scratch. We couldn't do YouTube or Chrome, right? We couldn't create an entirely new brand without it being attached to Google. And so we tested a whole bunch of iterations. And then when we thought about the experience from a customer perspective, we were like, well, what's the store mostly about? And we thought to ourselves, the vast majority of the use of phones, and this is still true today, sadly, is most of the store is about playing music, playing videos, and playing games. Like that's what most people use their phones for. And that's where you see the highest level of engagement generally in terms of applications. And so we went through a lot of iterations and we came across Play, right? It was just like the obvious things. Like you play games, you play music. There's not much more of a story to it than that. It was just so obvious.
And I will admit,
That,
Patrick, when I first heard it, I got to tell you, I didn't like it at first. I was like, Google Play, what the hell's that? Then, marketing guy and started to pay attention to it. It became obvious to me. Sure, of course, it's going to be called Play because of what you just said. Because that's what it is. It's somewhere. It's a place to go play. How does it feel to be part of a legacy product that still lives on today? The Google Play brand still lives on today. I call you the brand father jokingly, but that's pretty cool, Patrick.
it is. It is very cool. I don't think about it, that often, Keith, because I think you get so absorbed in a project like that, and really your goal is to provide the best possible experience for people, and for
Yeah.
people to hopefully, what I always say is the goal of good marketing is what I call brand love, right? That's the ultimate aspiration of any marketer. It is to create an iconic brand that not only people recognize, but people have an emotional affinity with that, right? So if you look at certain brands globally or in the United States,
Hmm.
I think it's fair to say that Coca-Cola still globally has a very strong emotional connection with consumers, right? Whether you believe in the health benefits of the product, that's a separate question, but it's an amazing brand, right? When you look at Apple, amazing
Hmm.
brand. When you look at Starbucks, amazing brand, right? There are certain brands that people say, no matter how much money you give me, or no matter how much cheaper the competition is, I will not shop there. I will not buy that, right? And
Hmm.
that's where you get this idea of love. You get a very strong emotional connection, and that's what we were trying to do with Google Play. I couldn't tell you if they ever reached that because I left Google quite some
Sure.
time ago, and so I don't have any data to know whether that they reached that goal or not. But that was certainly the idea. And when you looked at the early product videos, there's a video online on YouTube which you can look for called Suitcase, or I don't know what if it's called Google Play launch video or Suitcase video or whatever. But the launch video was all around bringing out that emotional connection with people. And it was an award winning. We won like awards at Cannes for that and stuff like that. So building a brand that is so ubiquitous that everybody knows, that I think a lot of people do feel strongly about, that is amazingly rewarding.
I I would think it would be also amazingly rewarding, and maybe you have or have not thought about this, but people touch your brand. Like it's in their
Yes.
hands, it's in their pockets. They use their fingers to touch it and scroll with it. And as a creator, yourself as a creator, as somebody who makes stuff that you want people to buy and appreciate, that has to be very rewarding as well. Like honestly.
Yeah, it's very cool. It's very cool. I've had similar feelings. I worked for Pepsi briefly at the beginning of my career, and I launched like Pepsi Max and Seven Up and stuff in
Yeah.
Latin America. And when you see brands come to life and people talking about them and consuming them, it is a very cool feeling, right? I think as entrepreneurs, you've been an entrepreneur as well. When you create something from scratch, and people see value in that, and
Hmm.
people, the brand values, they understand what you're trying to do as a brand, they understand what the brand stands for, what it means. That part's really special, right? It's like
Mhm.
people look at Patagonia, which is one of my favorite brands, right? There's a lot of values behind that, right? These guys really stand for something. They have a purpose, they have very clear values in terms of the environment and things like that. And when consumers really get that, then as a marketer, you're like, wow, I've actually done my job. Like the brand is transmitting
Mhm.
what the intent was when we started this whole project. And from
Mhm.
ideation to realization it's a journey. It's pretty cool.
Mhm. Patrick, what was the most surprising lesson you learned during the creation and launch of the Google Play Store?
Wow, that's a good question. What was the most surprising thing I learned? One of the things I learned at Google is something that we saw this week with OpenAI. And I think one of the most surprising things I learned at Google was you can have remarkably intelligent people working on something make amazingly stupid mistakes. And that's because in our society, we look at intelligence as just raw IQ, right? The ability to solve very difficult problems or to create technologies or whatever. What we fail to appreciate often in society, and the genesis behind a lot of the mistakes made at OpenAI this week, is what I call EQ, right? Emotional intelligence. And one of the things that surprised me, not always in a positive way, at Google and in Silicon Valley, was the lack of emphasis placed on emotional intelligence. Because when you don't instill a healthy level of emotional intelligence in leaders, they will make what could be perceived as very basic mistakes, right? In terms of communication, in terms of trampling on people's feelings, in terms of lack of empathy, in terms of pushing people too hard, pushing people to the breaking point. We had a lot of people on the play team that left after play launched because they were just so exhausted and so burnt out. My marketing team, when I left the company, half those people left. And so I think one of the things I learned that was very valuable was the importance of good leadership, the importance of really training people to be good leaders, explaining to managers what it means to really listen to a person as opposed to just talk, what it means to really empathize with an employee when they are having a really bad time at home and are not performing at work. And that's something which I think Silicon Valley still needs a lot of help on. They build amazing things. They do it at breakneck speed, but sometimes they do it in a way which hurts a lot of people, damages the culture of the company, does not pay attention to the values on which the company is found, right? And even Google has made these mistakes, despite being probably more progressive and self-aware on a lot of these things. So that's on the not so good side of things, areas to improve. I think in terms of the good things is, I think when you work with a level of people who are that talented, and when you have such a strong culture as Google did, I don't know if it still does, because of course I've been gone for a long time, so I can't really comment on Google's culture today. But when you have such a strong culture and such a strong value, accompanied with just a raw, insane amount of talent, what you can do as an organization is remarkable, which is why when everybody decided to poo-poo Google 6 months ago when OpenAI launched ChatGPT, some of us, maybe ex-Googlers especially, laughed and said, this is the beginning of a long battle. Don't rule Google out. It's still Google. And I think they are responding. They're turning that ship. It's a big ship, but they're turning that ship as quickly as they can. And they are building some remarkable things in integrating artificial intelligence into a lot of their products. It's a testament to what they're able to do as an organization and what you can do when you combine strong culture and values with insane engineering talent and just raw human talent. So yeah, those are some of my learnings. I learned a ton of things at Google.
Let's speak about your remarkable accomplishments during your 10 years in Silicon Valley. But you did all this great professional stuff, but you never really found yourself, never really found your purpose. There are a lot of guys that are in your shoes, looking back at the journey you've had until you finally found your big why. What are you saying to those guys that are listening right now? I look at the content you create and you are a man of purpose. Let's speak about that.
Look, I think there's a great analogy which I read somewhere the other day, which is basically men and women have two mountains to climb. The first mountain that we climb is the mountain between when we're like 20 to 40, right? And that mountain is really about success in the way that society tells us we should think of success. Building a company, climbing the corporate ladder, being a great athlete, making a lot of money, fame, recognition, the house, the car, whatever, right? All the things that we're told we're supposed to want, and all the things that we're told are the trappings of success, right? What really happens? What really happens if you have any degree of success in your chosen field, whether you're an athlete or you're an engineer or a marketer or a CEO or a founder, is you get to the top of that mountain at some point. If you are, lucky enough and work hard enough and the stars kind of align. And then you look from the top of that mountain, and often many of us find that we look down around the valley, and across the valley we see another mountain, and we realize that we climbed the wrong fucking mountain. And that's what I had. I had a lot of things. I had a beautiful car, a beautiful house. I was making really good money at Google. I had a lot of recognition. Play was an enormous success. I think it's a $40 billion business now. It was 700 million when I joined. I think we did okay. I had headhunters calling me up for all sorts of stuff. I could have my choice of whatever CMO gig I wanted to in any startup. But there was an emptiness there that crept up on me. And I think it happens to a lot of people when you're quote unquote successful, is you look around and you go like, shit, is this it? I worked my ass off for this. I have this stuff. And yet I don't feel complete inside. There's a big old hole. There's something missing, in my life. And that's a big part of what I talk about in the book, which is now a couple weeks ago became a bestseller on Amazon. And it's the journey of realizing that you've climbed the wrong mountain, and then that now you have a new mountain that you need to climb. And the new mountain that you need to climb, which I think some of us are fortunate enough to have to face, is this mountain of finding meaning and purpose. It's not about making money. It's not about the yacht. It's not about the house. It's not about the freaking 5 cars. It's not about the country club. It's about finding a reason for continuing to go on and to struggle, because life is a struggle. If you look, you talk to friends on a daily basis and people are going through bankruptcies or divorces or health. We all have our shit, right? We all have our stuff we need to deal with. And so I climbed that mountain, and then all of a sudden one day, like in 2017, I was like, dude, I totally climbed the wrong mountain. This is not working. I'd been pushed out of a startup. I got into some altercations with a CEO, and it wasn't working. And I left while they asked me to leave. And one day I woke up and I was like, shit, this is not working. Like, I have to totally reinvent myself. And so purpose became my quest. And so I read a lot. I hired a coach. I went to all these freaking seminars. And I did all these psychological tests online, trying to figure out my strength, my weakness. I'm missing something. And then I hired this coach, and it was really frustrating to work with him in the beginning, because what good coaches do is they don't give you the answers. It's like Socrates, right? They just ask you a lot of questions. And they're very simple questions. What do you want? Well, I want this. Why do you want that? Because this is this. Why is that important? And it's just why. And it's just like you go deeper down the rabbit hole. And so my why, to my surprise, ended up being I really want to help people get through the same shit that I went through, because I know a lot of people go through it. Like I looked around at quote unquote successful people, and I'm like, these people are all as messed up as I am. So obviously, if we're all messed up, there's got to be an answer, and we're all looking for the same answer. So how do I help people find that answer? And that's how I came to coaching. I never in my wildest dreams, Keith, thought I would go from being a tech CMO to becoming an executive coach.
When you look back at your childhood and knowing what you know today, was there something, can you identify something, whether it was behavior or an event in your life that put you on this predisposed path to being a coach?
It's a really good question. Maybe you should become a coach. Coaching can take many forms, right? I think, Steve Jobs once said it. I think he said it in the commencement speech at Stanford. He said, you can only connect the dots looking backward. You can't connect the dots in looking forward. It makes sense when you look backwards at where you've been and why things have to happen the way they did. I think if I look back on it, there were things about what I do today that were definitely manifest when I was a kid. I do a lot of motivational speaking. I'm a keynote speaker. I get invited all over the world by companies to speak on stage about my journey, about my book, about purpose, about entrepreneurship, innovation, and how to manage change, which scares the hell out of most people. So I do a lot of that. And definitely, I think if you look at your childhood, there are signs to pay attention to of things that you enjoyed doing as a kid where you were in a state of flow, right? There's a famous book called Flow, right? By one of the original psychologists who coined the term. And flow is really when we're in this state where we're challenged enough so that it's not insanely hard, but it's hard. But we're enjoying the process of doing this hard thing so much that you lose track of time, right? So then you're in a state of flow. You find that with high intensity people who are doing something really hard, like scaling a mountain or playing basketball. There you go. But it's like you're in the zone, right? People call it the zone. Some people call it zone. And you're doing this really hard thing and you're just like totally into it. And in my case, I think part of it was like, I was like a class clown. I like to be on stage. I like to be acting. And I was good at it. And I always thought whether I should become an actor. And then because my father was a big business guy, I ended up becoming a business guy, right? Most of us follow what our parents do. But there were kernels, there were signs that being on stage was something that would be a natural for me, that I would really enjoy. To answer your question around coaching, I can't look back and say that I was one of these people that really wanted to help others in school. That was not me. I was not the helper. If anything, I was the one who needed a lot of help.
That's the sound right there.
Was I a helper in high school? No. But I think there was a need to have recognition. I think when you look at Maslow's kind of hierarchy of needs, one of the needs is to be recognized. And people have different ways of doing that. And maybe for me, part of it is coaching. I don't know. I don't know the answer.
You mentioned connecting, and you've moved in your career several times. During your career shift, personal changes, how did you maintain connections? How did you build new ones, especially when moving from country to country? And how did you do that?
Yeah, look, it's hard to do. I think when for example, I just moved to Miami now, and I've been here for 4 months, and it's like a whole new experience again, right? It's like another move. I've counted them. It's my 33rd move. And I think you have to put yourself out there. You have to have, I think, a genuine curiosity about other people, like a genuine curiosity about, hey, this guy Keith Bilous, what's his story, and what has he done, and where does he come from, and what have been his challenges, and what kind of businesses did he build, and what were the things that he found hardest, and what were his struggles. And so I think when you develop a curiosity for other people, it makes it easy to listen to them, which people love. People love to be listened to. And it makes it easy for you to build relationships, because a lot of relationships are based on trust. And when you're a good listener and you're generally interested in other people, people feel that, and people want to be around people like that. I think that's one thing, is the ability to listen and ask good questions. I think the other thing is, one of the things that really helped me, and this is a personality thing, so it doesn't work for everybody. People are different. But the thing that always really helped me enormously was, I'm a super high energy guy, as you can tell. Like, you're very similar in that sense. Like, we're very high energy people, and we're very positive people. And I think people today are drawn to that more than ever. People are desperate for positivity. They're desperate for energy. They're desperate for what I call authenticity. People are sick of all the bullshit. And I've seen some of your podcasts, and you're very authentic in the way you interview people, and the way you engage with people brings that out. And so I think I've always tried to be the way I am, and people really appreciate that. That's the feedback I get most often when people have read the book. Like, I'll have random people reach out and say something. Like, I was playing a video game, and the other day I play Elder Scrolls Online, because I love online gaming. And one of the people in my guild who doesn't know me that well, she reached out on Discord. She said, "Oh my God, I read your book. It's so authentic." So that's the word people always use. So I think being yourself and not pretending to try and be something that you're not, or being somebody that you're not, I think that will bring people to you.
Let's talk about the book, but let's not talk about the obvious part of the book. We'll get to that in a second. Let's talk about the book from the perspective of, maybe I want to write a book. Maybe one of my athlete guys, listeners, maybe my business leader wants to write a book. Tell me and teach us something about writing a book, Patrick, before we talk about your book.
You don't want to hear what I'm going to say.
I do.
Don't write a book.
All right.
Don't write a freaking book. We'll do it. Don't do it.
Moving on from Patrick.
No, I'm just kidding. But writing a book, Keith, shit. It's been one of the hardest things I've ever done. And if somebody would have told me how hard it was going to be to write this freaking book, and how much I would have to push just to get the sales that I've gotten, or the recognition, I honestly don't know if I would have done it. It is one of the hardest things that you're ever going to do. I thought starting a company was hard. Writing a book is different, because it's like a personal project. It's a personal mission. Nobody gives a shit if you write this thing. Nobody's gonna, unless you have a publishing deal, nobody's gonna hold you accountable to finishing it. Right? I chose to self-publish. When people told me publishers were going to take 90% of my revenue, I was like, fuck that. Nobody's taking 90% of my work. That's not happening in my universe. Okay. That's just not going to happen. So the answer was, I had to do it all on my own. Like, I had to learn how to become an author. And man, it was horribly hard. Tips that I would give to survive the book writing process: first of all, get an editor. You have to get somebody who can sanitize and read the stuff that you're writing, because you might think it's poetry, and somebody's going to look at it and say, this is garbage, right? So you have to have a neutral, independent person who's reviewing your writing and giving you real feedback on what they're seeing, okay? And it has to be somebody who's a lot of experience writing books, who's seen this stuff. So I was fortunate to run into my editor and fellow writer, Richard Bainan. He was introduced to me from another friend of mine from business school, because I went to one of these top business schools, and there's a big mafia of alumni all over the world. So my business school connections helped me with everything. And one of my business school buddies was like, dude, you got to talk to this guy. He's edited like 5 of my books. He knows what he's doing. You don't know shit. You should talk to him. So I talked to him, And he took my 700-page draft that I'd worked through COVID, like 2 long years writing this thing, which I thought was awesome.
All proud, right?
You're
the best.
Yeah, he read it. And he like calls me 2 weeks later. Hey, I've got some good news and some bad news. He was a British guy. I've got some good news and some bad news. I was like, all right, what's the good news? The good news is I love the stories. They're brilliant. It's so deep. It's so authentic. I was like, all right, what's the bad news? The bad news is the writing's fucking atrocious. You got to start all over again. And I was like, oh my God. Just like, and I'm like sitting there running a startup in Chile, and I'm like 7,000 miles away from family. And I'm just like, I can't, I'm like trying to, get my company to survive. And I'm like, I can't like rewrite this book. But I think having somebody who can critique your writing, having somebody who can structure your writing, like he changed the structure of my book, right? It's like it was written in a different person, and he changed it to like third person or whatever it is in today. And I had originally written it in first person. He was like, no, it's got to be in third person. And then he changed other things. If you read the book now, it's really cool. It's like a movie where it goes from past to present. And you got a lot of shows and movies, how they do that.
Yes.
I didn't know any of that stuff because I'm not a writer and I'm not a film director. He was like, no, we're going to do past to present. And I was like, what? I was like, how the hell is that going to work? It's got to be linear. He said, no, it's not. Let me explain to you how. So he really helped breathe life into this. Like he helped me rewrite it. He helped, obviously, he trimmed enormous, like went from 700 pages to 250 pages, right? I mean, this is a book that you can read in 6 hours. I've had friends of mine and people that I know in business read this on a plane ride to New York, right? So that helped enormously. I think the other tip that I would give people is that writing is like sports, right? It's like anything that you want to be good at. You have to be insanely disciplined about, you have to treat it like a sport. And the only way that you are successful in any sport or in business or in anything is you have to develop strong habits, right? So you have to develop the habit of every day from Monday to Friday from 5 to 6 a.m. I'm writing, right? So building the muscle, building the habit of writing every day is something that you have to do. And you have to set yourself deadlines, and you have to say, okay, the first draft's got to be done by this date. Even if you blow by the date, right? Which I did 3 times. Even if you blow by the date, you got to give yourself a goal, right? And then I think the last tip that I would give people who are considering writing a book, because again, you heard it from me, don't do it. The last tip that I would give people is, and there's a chapter obviously on this in the book, which is like so appropriate. You got to hold yourself accountable, right? So if you're going to do something like write a book, you need to go out and tell everybody about it. You need to jump up and down and put it in your blog and your social media and tell your parents and tell all your cousins and everything. You got to be like, look, I'm writing this book. It's going to be on this. It's going to come out for Christmas. And I want everybody to know. And I want you guys to read it. And so what I found, Keith, which was super interesting, is initially when I started, I was scared. I think everybody gets scared because you're like putting your voice out. My book is highly personal. There's shit in there that people read it and are like, holy shit, how did you possibly write about this and make it public? But I made myself accountable to a lot of people. I told so many people I was writing this book. I told my friends, my family, my ex-wife, my kids, my coach, my employees. Everybody knew I was writing this freaking book. And so when you do that, it forces you to be accountable and to work at it, because people start going, hey, what about the book? Dude, what's up with the book? Weren't you writing on the book? Wasn't it going to come out next month? Wasn't it going to come out in December? And all of a sudden you're on the hook. It was, those are the tips I would give to people,
It's been the same thing with this show. I've said to people, we're going Monday to Friday noon. And I've done that to hold myself accountable, because if I want people to show up for the show, then I got to show them I'm going to be there for them. So it's that same accountability. So Patrick, we've learned why we should not write a book. Now it's your turn to tell the audience why they want to buy your book and where they can get Patrick Mork's book before we wrap up to say goodbye.
Sure. I think every single one of us, right, watching the show or not, we all have dreams. We all have things that we want to do with our lives. We all have kind of things that we want to change. And so my reason for writing this book was I wanted to try and simplify the process of change in words, right? I wanted to share some stories that are very personal about all the hell that I went through to make the changes that I need to make to leave a career embark on a new career, change countries, do all this stuff, right? And I wanted to do it in a way that was fun and entertaining for people, which I've heard it is. And I wanted to leave people with practical exercises that they could do on their own without having to hire an expensive coach. Because the reality is most people can't afford an expensive coach. It's just too expensive, right? And so people always say, like, how do I make change happen in my life? What do I need to do? And what I found was that there's so many basic tools, Keith, which don't require you to have an MBA. They don't require you to have gone to a good school. They don't require you to have worked at Google, that anybody can use. And so my goal with the book was entertain people, educate people, give them the tools to make shit happen in their lives. Whether they do it afterwards is up to them. But I wanted to give them the tools and entertain them in the process and give them great stories all in one package so that they could read this and they could hopefully start applying some of these things in their own lives and see change happen. And do it from the perspective of reading something that's fun as opposed to reading something that sounds like a boring class on self-development, because nobody wants like a class on self-development. It's just too dry. If you want to have a fun time and enjoy the process, enjoy the stories, have a couple of good laughs at my expense, which I'm sure you will, have some cries at my expense. There are people who have told me that they have had some cries at my expense. And if you have any desire to make an important change in your life and lead the kind of life that you were meant to lead, I think this book will help you get there. That's my honest belief. And that's what people who have told me, including top CEOs at startups and top CEOs in big public companies, including a $25 billion retailer. The CEO of that company read the book and was like, this is really inspiring. And this is really about courage and change. So that's my pitch, if you will. I never wrote this book for the money, Keith. I've always been very open about that. And as authors, I'm glad I don't live off the book, because no matter how many copies you sell, you probably starve anyway. But it's a book I think people will enjoy. It's a book that I think will make people profoundly think about their lives. And it's a book that's going to give you the tools and some of the questions that you need to make the changes you want. Whether you do them afterwards is up to you. And mostly the book's available online.
And they can find it on Amazon. They can find it online, right?
Yeah, you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Apple Books. You can find it on Google Play Books. You can find it on Barnes & Noble online. I haven't really made much of an effort to get it into traditional bookstores and stuff, because that's just a ton of additional work. But yeah, any major online retailer, you'll be able to find it. And I think I think there's a Thanksgiving promo running on Amazon right now. So I think it's like $1.99 for this week as opposed to $9.99 or something for the ebook. So.
Perfect. Was there anything that you wanted to throw out there that we did not get to? I know there's plenty in my brain that we did not get to, but we ran out of time, so we're going to have to book a number 2. Is there anything that you want to throw out there that we just did not get a chance to talk about today that you feel is important the audience hears from you?
I think the only thing I would tell your audience to think about it is, this is especially true for guys, and this is especially true for people who have been, I think, fairly successful in anything, is it's okay to ask for help. I think sometimes there's a stigma, especially among guys, that we're supposed to be so tough, we're supposed to be so badass and invulnerable that we don't reach out and ask for help until it's too late often. And you hear horror stories of people that were once successful fall by the wayside because they don't reach out for help. And I was one of those in 2017 who was near depression and all that stuff. And so what I would say is never be embarrassed or too cocky about yourself to reach it out and ask for help to anybody, to a friend, to a therapist, to a girlfriend, a partner, a coach, whoever. I think people forget that the cool thing about asking for help, Keith, is not only do you help yourself, but actually you help the person who's helping you, because people feel good when they help others. Like I like doing what I do because I enjoy helping other people. It makes me feel awesome. It makes me feel needed. Whenever you doubt about asking for help, never doubt, because first you're going to help yourself, and second, you're going to make somebody else feel really good about helping you. So those would be my parting Thanksgiving words for the audience.
I love it. Those words are full of vitamin G. And I got to crack a joke with you, my friend, because I recall at the beginning of the show, you said you didn't like helping people. So clearly you learned something along the way. That
I learned a lot.
You learned a lot in your journey, and a very inspiring journey, Patrick Mork. Thanks for sharing it with us today. I'm just going to throw you off into the green room, say goodbye to the audience, and come back to you and walk you out of the lab. All right?
Sounds good, buddy.
All right.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for the invite. It was awesome.
Happy Thanksgiving, Patrick. Hang tight here. We're going to move you over here. I'm going to come over there and be mindful of everybody's time here today in the lab. Listen, I don't think I could really say it any better than how Patrick did. If you're listening to the show right now and you're thinking, I'm in a tough spot, because tough spots happen in the middle of the day, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the morning. But right now, if you're in a tough spot, you're thinking, where do I go next? Call a buddy. Like, actually call him, text him, call him, reach out to him. Reach out to me. I'm here. I'm in the lab. Truthfully, I had somebody call me last week. The show ended, my phone rang, and I was like, hello? And who phones people these days? And he's like, hey, do you got a second? I'm like, yeah. And he wanted to talk. So that's what we're trying to do here in the lab, is give this place, this locker room, this laboratory, this lab, a safe space for you business leaders, for you athletes, retiring athletes, any guys out there that just need some place to go. You come belong here. That's what we're looking to do. We do Monday to Friday, holding ourselves accountable, Monday to Friday, noon Central. We go live here in the lab, YouTube, X, and LinkedIn. And on a happy Thanksgiving weekend, have a great weekend. We're back tomorrow. We're holding ourselves accountable. We got Chris Dingman, NHL player, great story. Retired 2 Stanley Cup rings, played with Gretz, played with a lot of the big names out there. And he tells some interesting stories you're going to enjoy on tomorrow's show. And think about this. You go from playing in front of thousands and thousands of fans, playing with some of the biggest names in sports, and you're sitting in your car, humbled and maybe nervous to go do a cold call. I'm Keith Bilous. I'm live in the lab, and I'll see you tomorrow.